Okay. Can anybody hear us? We seem to be having issues with our audio. And I'm not really sure how to fix that. So we have here. Okay. Just trying to get everything working. Do we still have no audio? One moment, folks. If I have to start this over again, I will. My video was right there. You could have gone to my page from the video, but now you're all the way halfway down the list. I really don't know how to fix anything with the audio. I don't have access to any of those features.
Okay, here it is.
Okay, so I'm going to click on it and see if we've got sound. Do we have sound? Do we have sound?
Do we have sound?
Yes. I am so sorry.
Yes. I am so sorry.
So let's start again. All right, we're in week 6, and this chapter is The Gremlins in the Closet, Finding Balance. I must also have a dark side if I am to be whole. Carl Jung. Took a little while to get our audio going, but we are here. Thank you for sticking with us, and thank you for coming back for another chapter of the book. If you're enjoying this content, remember to engage with us in the comments, share it with your friends, and let us know how we can improve. And I hope to continue bringing you valuable content. So thanks for supporting us. What is a gremlin in psychology? You know that nagging, gnawing voice in your head that has nothing but terrible things to say about you? What the heck is that? Why do we have such a critical, nasty voice that only we can hear? How does that help us? A gremlin is an internal habit or feeling that often speaks to us in a voice that sounds like our own. It can stop us from taking action on or completing a goal. It can sabotage us by insisting that something is dangerous, risky, or scary. It picks fault with the things you do, comes up with excuses that sound perfectly logical, and has all kinds of disparaging comments about you that can hold you back from doing something beneficial for yourself. Some have called this voice the critic. It is well named because it is very good at finding all sorts of critical things to say. According to Freud, the critic is a product of the superego, which is the part of the psyche that is responsible for our sense of right and wrong and our moral standards. The superego is often in conflict with the id, which is the part of the psyche that represents our primal desires and drives. Freud believed that the critic helped to mediate this conflict by exerting control over the id's impulses and helping the individual to behave in a way that is socially acceptable. We touched on that in an earlier chapter too, about social behaviors and in regards to shame and guilt. So, however, he also believed that the critic could become overbearing and overly strict, leading to feelings of guilt and anxiety in the individual. The mental landscape. We're going to engage in the practice of weeding our gardens by pulling out the disempowering thought forms of the critic that will gladly tell us we are not enough and that we are stupid for attempting to achieve our dreams and goals. Your mind is a glorious garden, filled with so many beautiful flowering plants that feed your consciousness. However, weeds grow there too, and if not maintained, can infiltrate and take over even the sunniest patches that you have carefully tended. Weeds have deep roots, so waiting to snag hold of them until they've grown into monstrosities will make them more difficult to remove. When they're small and tender, we can pluck them out without a second thought, and hopefully won't have to come back the next year to get the pieces of roots, or even the seedlings that took hold, when we let that weed go to flower and it reseeded itself when we weren't paying attention. Keeping our awareness fixed on all the undesirable plants in our mind garden and removing them at the first signs of life is the only way to rid ourselves of their devastating effects and guarantee that the next year's crop of flourishing plant life will not be overrun by these potentially harmful influences. The difficulty in figuring out which is a weed and which is a plant you want growing in your garden depends on what you're trying to achieve mentally. We use this analogy here only in reference to the way that weeds choke out healthy plants and replace entire landscapes with their offspring. The mind weeds are those which keep you away from healthy practices, ignite emotional disturbances, ramp up your reaction rates, and bog down your thinking with harmful and often abusive self-talk. All of these are characteristics of weeds, regardless of how pretty the plant in the garden might appear. That rose bush you love so much and have grown so attached to might be the very thing you need to dig out. Is it cutting you every time you walk by? Is it in an undesirable location that has crowded out the primary focal point of your mind garden? Has it grown so old that it no longer produces roses, but has oversized thorns? It could be a flourishing bush that you've tended to for years that takes up a large part of your mind garden. Perhaps you hadn't noticed that the bush you were tending is prone to bugs, stifles the growth of other plants that you would like to see thriving, and robs water from nearby plants that are much better suited for your mental health. You may not have realized this was taking place because this one plant, which has become so healthy looking, has been a huge focus for so long that it took your attention away from the others that were easy to dismiss. You said to yourself, "Look at what a great gardener I am. This one plant's doing so well. I'm really proud of myself for keeping it alive." However, look at the rest of your mind garden, which is what we've begun to do in the previous chapters, with unbiased vision, scrutiny, and honesty. Do you see any incongruencies in your earlier planning or planting that are only visible now that it has had time to become well established? I bet you will. That's why we pulled out a shovel in our first chapter. Digging up fully grown plants is hard work, and you might think at first that it isn't worth your time or energy to start over in certain areas. But I assure you, it will be the most rewarding practice you can do for yourself when you get intentional about what is growing and where, and whether it is contributing to your health or not. When I brought this practice to my sister, she said to me, "A shovel? Why a shovel?" I took out my shotgun and I blew that plant and the gremlins crawling all over it to pieces. It was so satisfying, you've got to try it. I've even used a bulldozer, with me sitting at the wheel, feeling the thud of uneven earth between the tread while I ripped out an entire forest. It needed to go, and a shovel would have taken me years. I needed immediate results, and a bulldozer was my brain's solution for it. We're highly imaginative creatures. If you want to use a shotgun, a tractor, or even some etheric magic powder that dissolves the plant instantly, do it. You are only limited by what you can imagine. Make it fun. This is a challenging process, and any way you can help yourself make it easier, I'm all for that. To reiterate, even though that gorgeous rose bush, the one that represents the narcissistic relationship with your mother, is thriving, it might not be in your best interest to keep it. If it's taking over a space and you aren't feeling like your best self, that is not a valuable plant in the garden of your mind. It may be flourishing, but at what cost to you? Redesigning your garden space can seem like a daunting task, but I assure you, once those invasive weeds are removed and the plot land is wide open for new life, the results will come quickly and powerfully as you plant with intentional purpose and only allow what is serving you to take root, get watered, and be deserving of your attention. The art of weeding well. In an earlier chapter, we had you digging holes, digging deeply into the soil of your mind and looking at your garden plot with new and fresh eyes. You have a lot of seeds that we're going to make room for now. Each plant in your garden is representative of a different aspect of your life. You have many ways of interacting with the world, and they all need to be tended with careful consideration. These are the plants you tend daily. This is the focal point of your mind garden. I'm going to list the most common parts of life that all people, both men and women, interact with universally: personal relationship to self, familial relationships, your parents, siblings, relatives, and children, work relationships, romantic relationships, social relationships with your friends, sexual relationships, acquaintances, and even situationships, which are defined as a casual, undefined, commitment-free relationship. These are the common types of interactions that we all have with the people in our lives. They vary in the amount of energy required to maintain them, and your level of commitment to each is dependent on the amount of time, resources, and value you've placed on them, and the purpose they serve in your life. These relationships are also maintained based on whatever childhood values you were given in your youth. Belief structures are at the core of every relationship we engage in. When you sort out what meaning they have for you, weeding out what no longer serves you becomes much easier. Weeding, as we described earlier, is the process of removing anything that is not serving your highest growth. It's getting rid of all sources of abuse and disempowering habits that are encroaching on all your dreams and goals. These are waiting to be fulfilled, but can't thrive in an environment that's being taken over by all the distractions you keep entertaining. Your weeds are also the critical thinking regarding all these relationships you maintain. The critic judges us and other people in our lives and is often voicing well-disguised lies to keep us locked into beliefs and habits that hinder the path of healing. Critical thoughts can be crippling, paralyzing, demeaning, and really do a lot of damage to our interactions with others and ourselves because of the emotional toll it takes on our well-being. The gremlins hang on our shoulders and whisper in our ears with a voice that sounds like our own. Don't be fooled, though. They do not have your best interest at heart, and that voice can say all sorts of nasty things about you that are not true. Have you ever gone into work and one of your coworkers didn't say hello to you one day, and you instantly thought they didn't like you? Have you been sitting with your partner in silence, watching TV, and then a thought came into your mind that they might be angry with you over something, and you have no idea why? Then you felt the need to ask them about it, only to be met with a puzzled reply of, "No, why?" How about when you're spending time with one of your parents and you said something to them, and they made a face, but didn't speak right away, and you instantly thought they were judging you for it? They may have just been thinking about what you said before they could reply. How about sending a text to someone who did not get right back to you? Did you come up with a million reasons why they didn't respond? And were 90% of those thoughts a worst case scenario? This is called catastrophizing. Have you been hanging out with your friends and you said something in the group and the conversation goes silent? What are they thinking? Oh heck, what did I just do? I just committed social suicide. I'm doomed. All of these examples are how the critic, gremlins, can derail your thinking and take you off track of what really matters. These internal judges can justify all the nasty things they say, some of which are, "You're ugly. You're not smart enough. No one really loves you. You just fail at everything. You're such a loser. They hate you." And on it goes, like a broken merry-go-round that you wanted to get off about 20 revolutions ago. You're so sick from the ride, and it has no off switch, that the only energy you have left is used in holding on for dear life. That's called survival mode. When you have no energy to consciously counter this inner attacker, the voice gets louder, crisper, and is more difficult to shrug off. It can become our internal self-talk over time. The voice of the critic becomes indistinguishable because it has cleverly supplanted itself as our own inner voice. It's also important to recognize what influences in our lives, especially in our early lives as children, that have contributed to creating this landslide of detrimental thinking. We pick up on everything as children. If someone once told us that our new favorite pair of shoes looked like nurse shoes, and that set up a negative self-image that we present to the world, we may never buy those shoes again or wear them, regardless of how much we loved them and how comfortable they were when we initially made the purchase. I said this to my daughter. I'm not sure how old she was at the time. I think she was around 8 or 9, maybe 10. And I think nurse shoes are great. But for some reason, when I said they look like nurse shoes, she instantly and inwardly cringed. Like it had hurt her that I said that. And she didn't wear them. They were brand new. And I felt terrible for that. Later, when I found out what had actually happened, because we were having two different experiences. I was complimenting her, and she felt like I was shaming her and putting her down. So even the things that we say in the kindest way that we think that they're coming out can be taken badly. I just wanted to share that. That's why I wrote that in there, because it actually happened. So this is the mental programming, and it happens on a deeply subconscious level. We take in all the criticisms offered to us by external sources, and our brains are excellent at cataloging them right under the conscious layer of intentional thinking. Subconscious programs run our lives, and we have no clue most of the time that they are the motivations behind our decision making. As children, we cannot distinguish and intellectually analyze this input because we have no experience to reference rational and reasonable thinking that adults develop later in life. Most adults. Children will generally feel that there is something wrong with them, which is shame, or that they've done something wrong, which is guilt. Children usually have not developed enough resilience to be able to sort out this external input in a way that upholds their pure self-image. In many healthy environments, kids do have the tools to overcome these critical influences and uphold their sense of healthy self. They can shrug off the words, beliefs, and outright lies because they've been taught how to. This is becoming rarer in a society reliant on technology for connection, rather than family cohesion. Belief structures are shaped in our early youth. Your mind garden is plotted out subconsciously by all the external stimuli you take in. That's just how the brain works. It makes connections to everything, and it's the reason we all have such a unique perspective of the world. Perspective is relative to the personal experiences that shape us. Let me give you an example. Personal story. I went through a rough time in my early 30s when I felt like I failed at everything, because school taught me that. It seemed to me that everything I touched just ended up in ruin, regardless of whether this was actually true, which isn't even important. I believed it so strongly at the time that my journal entries reflected that belief, and I was living under the assumption that it was true. This led me to come to the realization that I felt unworthy of love. How are the two connected? Well, now, this is where it's tricky to sort out thoughts and feelings. As a child, my worth was tied directly to my productivity through the disease of perfectionism. It was a belief that my parents probably weren't even aware that I was developing. I was an overachieving student, outwardly confident, and inwardly overwhelmed most of the time. I thought that I had to constantly be doing and doing better than others, always making sure everyone was happy around me, and that it was my job to fix whatever was wrong in my surroundings. It was in my 30s when I was ready to tackle this issue because it had surfaced repeatedly throughout my life and I was unable to get to the core of it. It surfaced again through a series of perceived failures. These failures put my value as a human being into question. If I was not producing anything of value, then I was not valuable. Therefore, I was not worthy. I had gotten so good at tending plants that were destroying my mental space that I couldn't see the forest for the trees. This is highly oversimplified, but I'm sharing it with you to illustrate the concept. You will have your own to discover. This was not serving me. This was a long-standing gremlin that I did not have the tools to identify, trace, and get to the plant that had been seeding my garden perennially since childhood. It had seeded itself so thoroughly that it took several more years and a couple more relationships to get all the sprouts that had planted themselves in my mind garden while I'd been paying attention to other things. I'd pull out a patch, thinking I'd gotten them all, but a year later, I found those same thoughts returning. But I dealt with this already, I angrily told myself. I went back to that patch of my mind garden and realized that once again, more sprouts had grown while I wasn't looking. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the sprouts were growing around a single devastating thought, that main plant that kept receding. And I went to work digging it up until I had uprooted it completely, or so I thought. That was the summer of 2020. I carried this around with me for nearly 40 years before. And I'll tell you what, it's 2024, it reared its ugly head again. I finally had the tools, experience, and understanding to properly eradicate it. I tracked the thoughts down, connected the feelings that kept coming up every time I encountered my unworthiness, and finally felt a sense of peace that was, peace and unstoppable pursuit in my own happiness that I had not ever previously been able to reach. And here it says, yet this one still gets me from time to time. It's not gone away, but its severity has lessened greatly. This prolific cedar continues to sprout from time to time, but as soon as I recognize them popping up in undesirable places, I can now tug gently at the tender shoots, uprooting them before they go to flower. There are fewer and fewer as I continue this process, and I'm confident that one day there will be no more to look out for. The main way I managed to do this was by speaking of the shame that surfaced to my partner. I wrote it in a journal titled Lies, Trauma Triggers, at the top of the page and listed them out. Then I took some time to reality check myself with some of the achievements I had been making recently to counter the gremlins' voices. Shame must be spoken. The forest of unworthiness I've continued to dig up, bulldoze down, and even shoot to bits, it's still there. I don't want anyone to be fooled into thinking I've gotten rid of this. I respond to it now. I give it its due process, and I move on with oxytocin producing gratitude and remembering happy moments. I know what to do now, and I can catch it immediately. Thoughts are like bees, and we like bees. Thoughts are tricky because they can be fleeting, like a bee that just flits through the yard, past your face, and vanishes in the distance. They're there one moment, and then our brains move on to the next thing. Now, I want to make it clear we want bees pollinating our garden, so don't think of bees as a metaphor for what you're trying to identify as the problem. The bees will lead us to the plants that are taking over. Ah, there's gold here. Follow that bee. You know where the healthiest plants are growing. They know where the healthiest plants are growing and which ones are thriving. They're the keys to discovering the parts of your garden plot that are doing well. And by doing well, I mean to say the plants that have grown to maturity, not necessarily the ones you want. Bees, the fleeting thoughts that whiz by, are the harbingers of a growth mindset. Fleeting thoughts can come in the form of daydreams too, and they have positive effects on us as well. Just keep in mind how they make you feel in the moment. Feelings, as we mentioned above, are chemical signatures that are being released in your body, usually related to a memory or experience we had early in childhood. So, thought feelings are the chemical release that happens when we're using our minds and attaching an emotional marker on what is being thought and experienced. Following me so far? Thought feelings are the mind-body connection that concretes belief, behavioral patterns, habits, and runs our automations. We need to walk our mind gardens and reassess how we feel about what we've created there. Weeds grow by default. Some are obviously good because they hold in soil, prevent erosion, and are beneficial to our pollinators. Hold in soil equalizes, stabilize your mental landscape. Prevent erosion equals maintain resilience in the face of adversity. Beneficial to your pollinators equals leading you to the flowering plants that require your attention. All these metaphors are easy to understand for anyone who has worked a garden, large or small. You know that foxtail grass, once it goes to seed, will take over the landscape the following year. And it's so prickly. If you've ever gotten one stuck in your shoe or sock, then you know that they're not a friend in your garden. How about goat heads, aka tribulus? Nasty little buggers. However, let's say flax comes up. Their beautiful blue flowers and lace-like leaf tendrils growing in ditches on roadsides are a welcome friend in the mind. The beauty of driving past them is enough to calm the soul and help you enjoy the journey. This is what I mean about beneficial weeds in your garden. Some add beauty, while others are a hindrance. The wind blows, daily activity of busy life, seeding your verdant mental soil, your thought landscapes, and will plant your garden for you if you aren't diligent in taking a few moments every day to intentionally walk the rows, the wild places, the perimeter, and pull out the weeds that no longer serve you so the wind can blow in something beautiful rather than something invasive. Whew, I love plants. Perhaps that's become quite clear by now. I hope you understand how this metaphor can help you visualize exactly what your brain is doing while you're running around interacting with the world. The secret garden within you is such a transformative place that's brimming with life. Some plants grow whether we tend to them or not, while other plants require specific care. Are we good gardeners? Have we been tending to the more delicate plants or simply letting them die, replanting and letting them die over and over again? I mentioned that I do not grow orchids well. They come to my home to perish, even though they bring so much beauty. Have not developed the awareness of their personal needs to keep them alive. We all have areas that are strengths and weaknesses. Identifying them, honing our skills, and educating ourselves in the right ways can help us become good gardeners. Now, I may never be able to grow an orchid, but I know how to turn a patch of gravelly hard earth into a wildflower oasis. It doesn't happen in one season and requires a lot of care and attention. This is a strength I have. Orchids are my weakness. Instead of buying more orchids fruitlessly, wasting time, money, and energy, I'm focusing on my strengths and devoting my attention where I can do my best and feel good doing it. I feel terrible when I kill an orchid. Can you relate to any of this? The mind garden is the landscape you live in on a subconscious level. I used to have conversations with my mother about rewriting my subconscious programs. Well, before I ever heard the names Joe Dispenza and Bruce Lipton, she would say to me, "How can we do that? And why do we need to?" I think I've illustrated the answer to those questions in the above paragraph, so I'll move on. I named this chapter Gremlins because just like the movie from the 80s, these creatures that mess up our thinking are crafty, stealthy, and root deeply into our subconscious and then multiply exponentially. The brain is a multiplier. It proliferates anything we put into it. It doesn't know how to subtract, which is why Rhonda Byrne, the author of The Secret, was able to convey the law of attraction so artfully. It's changed the way we look at our internal world, giving people many tools to get to the causes of their ills and make radical differences in their own lives that support the desires and goals deep within themselves. Gremlins destroy our resolve. They are the precursors of depression and anxiety. Gremlins are the weeds in your garden, but they are also more than that. They're nasty creatures that purposely destroy the beneficial plants you have laboriously tended. This is incredibly dangerous. The bees of fleeting thoughts are our friends. The gremlins would be their counterparts, like an elusive shadow figure, scaring you half to death by stealing your joy, clouding your sunshine, and eating away at your sane reasoning. Gremlins are the enemy. I rarely use that example because I feel like everything has benefits, but I'm firm on the fact that has been well established by psychologists that gremlins have never done anyone any good. Slaying versus satiating. How do we know when we are slaying or satiating these nasty little creatures? What would the indicator be that they're gone for good, or at least for a season, because we've taken the right action to root them out? Or that they've been fed and are lying dormant until their next attack? We satiate our feelings with food, addictions, people, technology, and anything else under the sun that distracts us from our mission and purpose in life. Our feelings, even or especially the uncomfortable ones, are the key indicators of what we've been focusing on, what we need to focus on, and where our dreams live. It's easy to just wander around life without considering what our feelings are offering us, but it's harder to attain our dreams and goals if we're giving power to feelings that continually derail us from what we hope to accomplish. Feelings, any of them, are alarm systems that we don't pay enough attention to. Instead, it can become a habit of ours to stuff them down deep inside without voicing them. Or sometimes we just cover them with food to get a temporary jolt of joy and dopamine. We are masterful at distracting ourselves from them by engaging in social events where we find no pleasure, or scroll our phones, doom scrolling, I've heard it called recently, looking for instant gratification with likes. Or we mask them with rage and projection by barfing all of our hurt onto other people so that we don't feel so bad. Hopefully, we aren't getting violent with others because we refuse to look inward. It's hard to admit, but it happens. Feelings can tell us a lot if we take the time to just allow them to be what they are in the moment and follow the thought bees to the flowering plants that are begging for our attention. Satiating our gremlins is a practice, slaying them is a process. One becomes an unconscious habit that can become automatic. The other is an intentional and conscious act that requires our time, devotion, and commitment. You know you are satiating your gremlins if you are seeking immediate relief from a feeling and dismiss whatever thoughts are connected to it. You know you are slaying them when you allow yourself to experience the discomfort without judgment, and you are taking a deliberate action to chase down the thoughts associated with it. Chase the bees. They will show you the way every single time. We all know what we do in times of stress to get ourselves feeling immediate relief. We know how we sabotage ourselves. We also usually know what we need to do to feel good without needing to distract ourselves from where we are at the moment, but we often replace useful action with dismissal because it's easier, and I'll say safer. We're going to take a walk into the garden now and meander through the process of weeding and chasing the bees so we can get to the plants that are taking up too much space without providing fruit, flowers, or beauty in our mind garden. So before we get to the practices, let's just take a moment, and if you've gotten this far, leave me a comment. One way, leave me one way that you have, instead of slaying your gremlins by sitting with those uncomfortable feelings, what way have you satiated them? What did you feed that gremlin at that time and went, okay, I feel better for a moment, but I feel terrible about myself for what I did. I'm going to share mine. So years ago, I spent a lot of time in my car because I lived far away from where I worked, and I didn't feel very good about myself. So I would often pick up a loaf of shepherd's bread, and not the little bread bowls, they're cute, they're tiny. I'm talking like a full-on loaf of shepherd's bread. I would buy it on my way home from work, and I would just eat the bread all the way home from work so that I didn't get home and yell at my kids or hide. That was more the way that I dealt with things, is I would hide. I take a walk, be busy, find more work to do, even though I just spent all day at work. So I would eat the bread. That way I could at least be present with my kids for a moment. And it was really hard on my body. It was something that didn't feel very good. I gained weight, and I just physically didn't feel very well. Mentally, I wasn't feeling very well. I knew that what I was doing was not a self-care practice. So I'm going to share this. Last week, I needed to feel good, and I felt uncomfortable, and I'm like, okay, so I need to feel good and I need to sit with this discomfort at the same time. So how can I do this without satiating these gremlins? How can I do this by doing a self-care practice and also doing something that brings me comfort? What I did is I got a bread bowl, which is basically a mini shepherd's loaf. I sliced it up, I had some dip, and I had a little butter. So I didn't just eat the bread. I wasn't just stuffing my face with bread and feeding those gremlins. I took my time. I said a gratitude practice. I said, I know I'm practicing self-care. Bread is one of my addiction foods, and I'm doing this intentionally because it does bring me comfort. And I'm eating a small loaf of bread, and I'm eating it with dip. And I had to talk myself through this experience because I was using something that in the past was destructive, and I transformed it into a self-care practice. So these are the kinds of things that you can do. You know, it's just identifying what the issue is, identifying in what way you're avoiding it, and then making intentional actions and practices to sit with your discomfort and move through it safely and without hurting those around you, and bringing yourself comfort. That's what self-care is. Self-care is doing what you need to realign yourself with that sense of peace that you know exists within you on a deep level all the time. So that's my story. I look forward to hearing yours in the comments. Weeding our mind garden. Let the bees lead you to the gremlins. So journal work this week is become aware of the mind-body connection by pairing feelings and thoughts. On a page in your journal, I want you to identify just one place where you sabotage yourself. This can be anything in your life. Mine's unworthiness, the gremlin keeping me stuck. It's such a gigantic sabotage and an unconscious behavior that was crippling me for much of my life. So you want to separate your page in half with a divider line, or use 2 pages that face each other. Write it down, just one thing. It could be small or a large sabotage. It just has to have an emotional impact when you think about it holding you hostage. You can illustrate it with art, make it really vivid so you can see how it might be holding you back. Do you know why you feel this way? What feelings are they? Write them all down. So here's a writing exercise. What do you do to satiate the gremlins? I just told you mine. I used to use bread and what I also call toxic cleaning. It was a distraction. I'll just read it because it's in here. I would buy a loaf of bread at the store and eat it in my car until I felt better, sometimes consuming the entire loaf before I made it home. Sometimes I would sweep through the house like a tornado, and this one was really dangerous, thinking all kinds of disempowering thoughts about myself and my life as I violently scrubbed dishes, counters, and yes, baseboards and walls. Using the other half of the page now, or the facing one, write down your coping mechanisms, at least one way that you use some external source of pleasure, distraction, or dismissal to feed or satiate the gremlins so that they retreat back to the depths temporarily. You may notice there are several. Find a good image that represents your thing and paste it clearly. What thoughts come up for you? Write them down. These unhealthy coping mechanisms are some of the little bees that will lead you to the larger issue of what that gremlin actually is. Here's another practice. We're going to art it. On a separate page, I want you to collage, draw, or write down, in any combination that works best for you, who you could be, what you could accomplish, and how you would feel if you did not have this gremlin showing up and gnawing at you, and you did not need the substance that you use to satiate it. How would your life be different? You slay the gremlin when you practice the habit of doing the opposite of satiating. You slay them when you can finally believe the opposite of what they've been telling you. For me, instead of buying that loaf of bread, it became a healthy smoothie that I savored. Instead of cleaning in rage mode, I would practice internal gratitude meditation while I washed the dishes, wiped down the counters, and purposefully ignored the baseboards and walls. Write it. Gremlins sound like self-talk, and they tell lies. Speaking their nasty little words out loud in a journal and to a friend disempowered them by bringing it to light. Shame can't exist once it's spoken. Write out all the hurtful things they say to you, and if you can, write the truth next to it. These practices of comparison help us reality check ourselves. We need to know the truth, and we've been lied to for a long time. So it's important to reestablish a trusting relationship with our inner world. These are tools offered as methods for getting to the root of a problem. The pages you create now will be a reminder of the process and a roadmap to the life you've been dreaming of, where you aren't held back by limiting detrimental beliefs. Gremlins have no power when they aren't being fed. They cannot keep lying to you when you create a visual representation of them. You uncover their hidey holes, and they turn to dust in the sunshine. Voicing and naming it is just as powerful, and that is one reason why I urge you to work in groups of 2 or 3 people. When you have a small group of people you trust to move through this process with, it accelerates your healing journey. I did this work on my own, and it took many years. If I had been presented with a book like this before 2013 and a group of people I trusted, I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that I would have gone through this issue with so much more grace and ease. So I have 2 pages that I'd like to share with you. Since we talked about the bread, and I wasn't going to get this out, but it's in here and it's worth sharing. In 2013, I went through the gifts of imperfection, which I will gladly say in every single video because Brene Brown's book changed my life. It was a very slow and gradual change, but it really made an impact. So this page was all about numbing because Brene Brown talks about like how we numb ourselves so that we don't have to deal with things. And there you can see is my toxic cleaning, and there's my beautiful bread and sugar and ice cream and donuts. Yum. Yeah, there's a lot of ways. And numbing is just one way that we also satiate those gremlins. So these are things that lead me to numb. There's a lot. I didn't want people to see how much pain I was actually in. In 2019, I did it a little bit differently because I wasn't going through her course. I had updated it. And this is my page. So it was all about slowing the flow at that point. I needed to figure out how to calm all of those intense emotional states. And I was really aware that it was my worthiness that I was sabotaging by doing the things that I was doing, and that I would go numb. And so these things, they stop my growth. They isolate me from the ones that I love. It hurts my heart and it destroys my connection with my loved ones. And so the things that I can do to fight against it are to communicate my vulnerability, to be compassionate with myself, practice shame resilience, to be resilient against shame, remember to be present, have spontaneous fun, and sing your truth. So singing is one way that I can move through a painful emotion in grace. And these days, I'll just put my headphones on, and sometimes my partner always knows if I'm having a really intense emotional moment because I have a speaker and I'll put it in the bathroom with me, and I will like become a siren in the shower and just sing all of the feelings up through me and out my mouth so that they're not just like trapped. And you usually can feel it in a part of your body where something is stuck and trapped and holding energy, and it's a tightness, a constriction even. So when I sing in the shower like that, it pulls it all out, and everything gets much calmer. I sing in the car too. So those are my pages as an example of a way that you can, make it yours, make it beautiful. It's supposed to be a fun practice. I hope that all of you enjoyed this. It's kind of fun seeing the forever mirror effect behind me in the computer. And thank you for watching. Peace be with you. And we'll dive into chapter 7 next time. Until then, folks, blessings and be well. Like, subscribe, share, and please leave in the comments anything you want me to know. Anything about this video, about this channel, about Gremlins, and just your experience. Just sharing is how we can move through the world better. So I want you to hear what you have to say, and I appreciate you.